All right, good afternoon. Please continue to eat, but we'll go ahead and start the program portion of today's event. And I'm going to ask all of the speakers to come up, but Matthew Roberts, who you met previously with Nexsen Pruet, is going to moderate and we'll kick things off. So Matthew and all the other panelists, if you'll make your way up as well.
Thank you. And please come on up, my fellow panelists, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. When we heard about this event, it was very interesting because we've been doing some research on clinical research and some trends that may be occurring in the industry. And one of the trends that we were following was the focus on the clinical trial participant as a person, and to look at that a little more closely and to try to experience what they're experiencing and be more aware and tuned to it. So this is a perfect event for that, and I hope we'll all learn a little bit more about it. I'm going to start by I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with the patients. We have Heather Elizabeth Brown and Eric South. Heather Elizabeth, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Elizabeth Brown, and I am a COVID-19 survivor, a long hauler, as well as a COVID-19 patient advocate. So a little bit about me is in April of 2020, I got sick with COVID and I ended up in the hospital. And about 48 hours after I was first diagnosed with COVID, I had COVID-induced pneumonia. And so I was placed on a ventilator and I was in a coma for 31 days. And so I've had quite a harrowing experience recovering from COVID, not just being on the ventilator, but also a lot of post-COVID type of complications. And I have participated in several clinical trials as an advisor, as well as a trial participant. But I'm just very happy to be here to share my experience. And I think that this is very necessary. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Eric?
Hey, everybody. My name is Eric South. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. In February of this year, I was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, which is a stage 4 brain cancer. I'm currently an active participant in a clinical trial with MD Anderson in Houston, Texas. And I'm the founder of Gladiator Project, which is a 501c3 public charity that's designed to support patients, to fund research, and to find a cure for GBM. And I'm super excited to be here.
Okay, thank you, guys. And now we'll start with our panelist, LaQuinta.
Hi, everyone. LaQuinta Jernigan here. I'm the Executive Vice President for a company called mdgroup. mdgroup focuses on the patient journey through clinical research, ensuring that patients have access to the funds or the logistical support that they need to participate in clinical research. We try to address the common barriers that patients often encounter that sometimes prohibit them from either signing up and enrolling or continuing with the trial, such as travel, financial restraints, logistical issues, lack of accessibility, and lack of awareness. So we're fortunate to work with a lot of sponsors and CROs locally here in RTP, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you today.
Thank you. Katie?
Yes. Hello, my name is Katie Shaw. I'm a Senior Director with the Patient Recruitment and Enablement team at IQVIA. So the team that I lead, basically, we work to develop the strategies and products and innovation that we then propose to sponsors as part of RFPs to deliver their clinical trials. So we work both on kind of that strategy development and then also the delivery of the actual projects as they move forward.
Thank you. And Renée?
Hi, everyone. Renée Leverty, and I'm the program lead for Stakeholder Engagement Research Together program at Duke Clinical Research Institute, DCRI. So what we do is we create a program and a way to bridge patient, participant, caregiver, community orgs and patient orgs lived experience to help inform clinical trial process and implementation in order to make trials and the whole clinical research experience as inclusive as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a great panel, and we'll start with some questions for Heather, Elizabeth, and Eric. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found your way into your respective clinical trials And can you talk about the challenge of dealing with your serious health issues while trying to identify and evaluate clinical trial opportunities? Heather, you want to go first?
Absolutely. Okay, I will. So I think I've been involved in several trials, all right, as a patient advisor and as a trial participant. The interesting thing is all of these opportunities came about through COVID long hauler advocacy groups that I'm a member of, as well as support groups that I participate in. It was not through any medical professional or scientific professionals that I actually got the information about the trials. There wasn't any outreach. And so coming into these experiences, I found that the information was disseminated and communicated through the groups that I was in. Dealing with a lot of the health challenges that I've had while, I was in the coma. I ended up having a stroke. I had to go through physical rehabilitation in order to relearn how to walk. Again, I've developed several complications as a result of post-COVID. So I have been dealing with a lot of health challenges that were very difficult in order to navigate. And I did find that initially it was very challenging to deal with a lot of those health issues and concerns. And at the same time, navigate not only finding the opportunities for clinical trials or for research opportunities, but also evaluating their merit, understanding the details and the intricate parts of the trial, and then understanding what my experience would be and what my benefit would or would not be in participating in those trials. So I think that sums it up pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I think, and everybody's circumstances are going to be different. And mine specifically, I had a craniotomy in February to remove the tumor. And then we had 5 to 6 weeks post-surgery to make a decision on my treatment. And we were told, okay, the standard of care for GBM, which has been unchanged for 15 years, has to start on this date. And the success of the standard of care for GBM is not great. There is no cure. So our immediate thoughts were, okay, what other options do we have? Of course, for me, just having brain surgery, I had to rely heavily on my wife to navigate this, but I was heavily involved as well. We had to rely on our network of family, friends, professional network to even understand what we were dealing with. How do you find a clinical trial? What resources are out there? We were finally directed to clinicaltrials.gov, and that was a great resource for us. But the way that we found there's 2 things that you got to decide. Okay, are you going to go the clinical trial route, or are you going to go standard of care? And then if you go clinical trial, what's going to be best for you? Our process, I'm a businessman. I have been for 15 years in technology, consulting, and staffing. And we took a very proactive approach. And we interviewed neuro-oncologists at MD Anderson, Vanderbilt, Sarah Cannon, St. Thomas, Sloan Kettering. We interviewed neuro-oncologists to figure out who may be the best option for us to work with, to partner with on my care. And I don't know that most people out there have the wherewithal, the energy, the resources, or the support to do that. So that's how we started. And then as we did these interviews, we finally concluded we found a trial that would accept me, which was not easy because timing, location, travel, it's all part of it. And we were able to have the timing be right with MD Anderson and a clinical trial that aligned specifically with my genetic markers to get in. It was not easy. It took a lot of work. It was, 2 or 3 weeks post-surgery for me. And like I said, without my wife, we probably wouldn't have gotten through it.
Okay, thank you. We'll stick with Heather, Elizabeth, and Eric for the next question. When you found your trial and you were evaluating the various documents provided to you by the investigator, can you describe how it was reviewing documents like informed consent and the goals and objectives of the protocol? Was that an easy process for you? Heather Elizabeth, you want to start?
Yes. So when it came to actually participating in those studies and kind of evaluating that information, I did find that there were several pain points for me as a participant and as a patient. It wasn't just locating and finding the studies. I know that, there are websites that you can go and just Google, but actually understanding the in-depth, details about what the study entails, about what type of participants that they're looking for, about if I fit, similar to what Eric said, do I fit? Are they going to accept me? Do I match what they're looking for in terms of this trial or this study, was a little bit difficult. And I think that in terms of actually getting for lack of a better term, the nitty gritty of it, actually understanding the intricate details of the study, that was something that was challenging for me. I'm educated, I have a master's degree, but a lot of the terminology that was used was way over my head. And so I had to call friends who are physicians and who are surgeons and say, okay, what does this actually mean? Break this down to me, explain it to me like I'm 5, because I'm not 100% sure what they're asking for. I'm not 100% sure exactly what this means. And so I think that is a barrier for a lot of people who are trying to participate, because sometimes the information seems like an overload. Sometimes the medical terminology or the jargon that's used is not something that's explained in a way that's easily understandable and accessible to everybody. And there are people who are very willing to try to participate in trials. However, that is definitely a barrier, I think, to that participation and to the maybe enthusiasm with participating, because some people just may not understand fully what they're signing up for.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, and to follow up on Heather Elizabeth's comments, my wife is an attorney, my cousin is a pediatric oncologist, and I still had no clue half of the things that we were reading. And to be honest, one of the reasons why we approached it as we did with interviewing as many people as possible is because trust was one of the most important parts for us, because there's no way for us in a week or two to comprehend everything that was happening to us, not only with the documentation, but physically, mentally, emotionally. Ultimately, we decided to trust the organization that we went with for our care. And like I said before, I don't know that everybody has the capability or the opportunity or is able to travel across the country to interview doctors. So I would say trust was a huge part of that. I would say that I really didn't have any clue what the documents meant and had to rely on lots of other people to help us navigate it.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll turn to our panelists and talk about some issues related to this. This is for all of you, so y'all can all take turns answering. From a recruitment of a clinical trial participant perspective, how important is it that the materials related to the trial be understandable and accessible from a cultural standpoint? Because obviously it's not an easy process for the participants. So speak a little bit about your respective experiences with that.
It's extremely important because a lot of dollars are spent on patient recruitment, a lot, and it is very difficult in many studies, but yet you hear this common thread of information, like we just heard from Eric and Heather Elizabeth, where they were desperate to find a clinical trial, and they had to basically make it a full-time job to find one. So when you have people out there who are looking for clinical research but are not a part of this industry, it's incredibly important to have the materials reflect multiple cultures, multiple socioeconomic levels, and multiple educational levels, because otherwise it becomes uninviting. And if you don't feel invited to participate in clinical research, often that's going to be a barrier. If you don't understand what you're reading, then any trust issues you may have just become more prevalent, because now they're trying to trick me. There's something hidden in the fine print. This isn't for me. So it's extremely important that the materials reflect the communities that we're looking to enroll in a clinical trial.
I would even take that a step beyond, right? So the patient also comes to the trial with their care team. And if you think about their family, you know, if my mother was wanting to participate in a clinical trial, I would want her to give me the information so that I could read it myself and understand and help her to make that decision. So I think having materials that are good takeaway, whether they're printed or electronic, you know, being able to provide the patient with something that they can take away, share the opportunity with those in their life who help them make their healthcare decisions is also incredibly important. You know, we talked a little bit as well in kind of some of our prep discussions around even just translations. You know, when it comes to just translating materials, we actually do a two-step process. So we have two different people that review the materials, first to make sure the translation was just accurate, and second, to review it from a cultural acceptability perspective. Because if I say something in English and I translated that into German, it might not mean exactly the same thing, even though technically it's an accurate translation. And so I think really kind of bringing the spirit of your message and making sure that that's present in what you're, you know, communicating to patients is really important.
Of course, I agree with my wonderful panelists. I'm so thankful to be here. And I think it speaks to the importance of having as many people as possible at the table to help inform what we're creating and how we're messaging and in what facet are we messaging. And I have the good fortune of working with Heather Elizabeth as a patient advisor on one of the projects. And that's what this advisory group is doing. There are all people who were new to research. They'd not been an advisor before. So they were looking at everything we were creating and the processes from this really vulnerable place, this place of being overwhelmed, of not knowing science, not knowing research. So I think we have good intentions when we create processes and materials, but yet we are blinded in what we can see because it comes from our experience. So having as many people as possible there, diverse individuals, regionally, race, ethnicity, gender, age, is really key to helping with that cultural sensitivity and that outreach.
And having drafted some of these documents, it is a humbling experience to make something that you think a lawyer can understand, and then someone says, well, nobody else understands it, so redo it. You touched on diversity, and we'll go back to Renée and LaQuinta and Katie. Talk about the importance of diversity in clinical trials, because this is something that seems to be getting a lot of momentum now, hopefully. Tell us a little bit why that's important. You've alluded to it.
I think we all know why it's important. Historically, clinical trials have enrolled individuals who maybe had access to learn about the clinical trial, maybe had access to be available for the convenience of a clinical trial, didn't have historical mistrust. So we have to work intentionally to shift our outreach and our ability to be trustworthy with patients, with the communities that we want to reach, because we know in order to reach health equity, we need to have diverse enrollment and probably oversampling in some ways. Example, COVID-19, it's impacting Black and Hispanic and Latinos and American Indian, Alaska Natives at a higher rate. So for those trials, should there be oversampling because of the higher incident of impact?
And I think, yeah, from a data perspective, I mean, at the end of the day, right, these treatment options will be available to all, and we want to make sure that the data that we're collecting is representative of the population that will then receive the treatment. So I think also just from a data integrity perspective, it's also very important.
And just from an overall humanity perspective as well. And I mean, I think Johnson & Johnson just released this ad, and I thought it was quite remarkable. And it was an eczema ad. And it basically said, this is what eczema looks like on people of color. And I have eczema. I have never, ever seen a picture of what eczema looks like on a person of color. And I was like, yeah, that's what it looks like. But if you were trying to figure out, like, okay, is this eczema, and you Googled or you looked at images as a Black woman, nothing looks like what I have. And that's a huge problem, and it can't be fixed if we don't diversify our clinical trials. People need to know that therapies work for them and that they are represented in the research and in the medicine. And so I'm really glad that it's come to the forefront, and that's one thing we can thank COVID for, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we keep that momentum up after COVID is over, because it's not just for COVID, it's for all studies. It needs to be extremely important and something that we strive for.
Okay, good. Thank you. This would be a question for Renée, LaQuinta, and Katie. Talk about the importance of patient advisors. We're going to talk about the role, what happens when you are a patient advisor in a minute, but how has that role developed over the years, and why is it so important?
Well, I can start. As I alluded to, having someone who has had that lived experience, even though I've experienced medical issues, I would imagine we all have, I haven't experienced, if I'm working with a study where someone has had a heart attack, I don't know that experience. And I don't know what it's like to be the caregiver of that experience. I don't know what it's like to make a decision in an ICU. I don't know what it's like to make that decision about a clinical trial for someone else. So I think it's critical, not to use an ICU word, to have patient and community advisors help us understand what is that like for them, and how can we best offer support, information, whatever type of incentives to not to participate, but incentives in a way to create ease that they can participate if it is a clinical trial that they think is worthy of being in.
And I was just going to add to that. I think that you just nailed all the great points, Renee. But having them sit at the table, Eric's story is quite remarkable in the fact that he had to travel to Houston to participate in this clinical trial. And he had to get there on his own. He had to lodge himself on his own. He had to figure out who's going to take care of me while I'm here. He had 2 kids back at home. And sorry, Eric, for telling your life story, but that's the type of detail that a patient advisor can bring to the table. Because how was that for you, Eric? Was it challenging? How did you juggle being away from your family for all those weeks? And were you okay financially? Because I think that patients will tell you that, okay, you're reviewing a protocol, and they sit there and they say, okay, so I have to take 7 weeks off of work, relocate myself, and get to and from treatment. That's a huge financial burden for me. And it may not be for everyone, but it's going to be for some people. And so those are the types of insights that they can bring to the table to help us consider every aspect of the clinical trial, not just what we're reading in the protocol, but how is this going to impact this person's life.
When does the patient advisor become connected to the participant? Is it during the matching process, or is it once they're in the clinical trial?
Well, there are 2 tracks, and there are overlaps. So there's a patient or a participant who's in the clinical trial, and I know we all work to create value for their participation. And we can talk more about that. And then there are advisors. They may be in the clinical trial, or they may have the lived experience that can help inform the study. So for Heather Elizabeth, how we met was through a patient advocacy group that she was part of, that I had a relationship with, contacted the patient advocacy group, and Heather Elizabeth and I met after that.
Question for Heather Elizabeth and Eric, if you want to weigh in about the differences that you've experienced being a clinical trial participant versus being a patient advisor. Heather Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Yes, I think that it's been quite interesting. I am a patient advisor on 2 different trials, one with the Active Force B and one with Recover through NYU. And it's been interesting because as an advisor, I feel like I have a more detailed and intimate understanding of the study. I feel like I have a more personal relationship with the people who are putting the study together, who are organizing the study, and who are trying to make it what it needs to be for the patients that will be participating. So as an advisor, being able to see it from that perspective, being able to answer questions and give my lived experience and kind of talk about some of the challenges and some of the pain points that I see from a patient standpoint, and then see, especially with Active 4C, for example, them really take that into account and implement that in how they're going to roll out the trial and the study, I think is invaluable. Patients want to feel heard, right? We want to feel seen. We want to feel like our experiences are, we know that our experiences are valid, and we want to make sure that those who are studying us understand that our experiences are valid and that they're not invalidated by almost giving lip service or just kind of making it a figurehead type of thing, like, oh, we have patient advisors, we have people who are advising us, but not really taking our input into account and actually making actual changes and impacting the outcome based on what we're telling them or what we're sharing with them about our experience. So I think that has been probably the most transformational part. As a participant, I have seen value. However, I have noticed the difference between participating in a study or a trial and being an advisor in the amount of information that I receive, the depth of explanation that I get about the study and about the overall ethos of what's going on, and also the reception and the communication that I get. And I don't know if maybe that's probably because patient advisors are a smaller group and it's a lot easier to have a more intimate or personal connection with people when you're meeting in a small group of 5 or 10 people versus when there's a clinical trial that may be 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 or however many people are in the trial. So I think that that's part of it. However, at least in my experience, I definitely see the difference between patient advisors, but I think that it's a very, very valuable aspect of the whole clinical trial and research part of it. And so I hope that more groups will kind of expand their understanding about how to incorporate more patient advisors and even how to get patients who are participants in the trial to move into an advisory role. Like if someone's already kind of been through part of the trial, they can kind of give a different input and say, this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like, this is what was difficult for me, this is what made it easier.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to share. I didn't have a patient advisor. I was in a very small trial with 3 participants. I was probably my own patient advisor. You know, I had the mobile cell phone number for my research nurse, the cell phone number for my nurse practitioner, and I was constantly checking in with them and even reminding them of things that needed to go on. And this is not to say anything negative of MD Anderson, because it's been amazing and I've had no recurrence and things are going really well. But I see the value of that. I probably could have been a very good patient advisor for other participants because I was heavily proactive and involved with my care. And I had to be because there wasn't anybody really to lean on, at least in my particular instance. So I would just say I see the value. And I think anybody who's in a trial that doesn't have a patient advisor, get their cell phone numbers and blow them up if you have questions.
Right. This is a question for everyone, and we've referenced this, but I want to have a more deeper dive into the importance of support groups who, in our case, have directed folks to clinical trials. So could we start with you guys talking about the importance of patient support groups when managing disease and getting access to trials?
Support groups are critical. They provide so much insight into the patient community and what their needs are. So when you're embarking on a clinical trial, whether it be in my capacity or Katie's or Renee's, the most important question is to ask, well, who are these patients? It's really hard to design a program for patients if you don't know who they are. And if you don't have those same lived experiences or a part of that community, it's really hard to figure that out. So that's where the patient and support organizations really come in. Connecting with them, partnering them, working with them, and supporting them allows you to gain those critical insights so that you can then tailor a program that meets the needs of that particular patient population a lot better than if you were just going at it alone.
And I think, yeah, definitely in terms of even like co-development of materials, we've done that a lot with advocacy groups and other support groups, sharing the message of the trial, a great source of insight. And I think, going to the source of where the patients are getting their information about their condition is really critical. That's really part of, kind of finding the pathway that they're walking so that you can present the trial opportunity at the right time.
And, it's hard to go last. So, I'll add, you referenced the dissemination of information, and we always think of medical journals, medical conferences, but how do we get this information from a clinical trial, knowing about a clinical trial, but the findings to the community served? So patient organizations are fantastic about that, and also this really matters to them. They are struggling. They are, concerned, worried. It's personal. And so there's commitment, and partnering is wonderful as far as helping build their infrastructure and their knowledge around research, and then learning from them all the nuances of the disease.
Mm-hmm.
I would just
and
add,
Renée, Katie, yeah, please go ahead.
I would just add one thing I think, and Eric spoke about it earlier, is trust. And I think that that's such a vital foundational part of when it comes to patients and participation in these trials and finding this information. A lot of times it's the other people who are dealing with the lived experience just like you are, the people who are in the trenches, so to speak, with you, who can speak to the validity of this trial or this group that is trying to recruit. So I'm much more likely for somebody who I've been having conversations with about, our shared issues or our shared challenges or our shared triumphs, if they submit or in the group say, hey, I heard about this clinical trial, this group is really great. I've worked with them before. I know people who have worked, and we think that it would be really helpful. Is anybody interested in joining? I'm much more likely to be amenable to looking into that, researching that, and possibly participating in a study based on the fact that this is coming from word of mouth from somebody who I have established some sense of relationship and trust with. And so therefore that trust extends into the organization or the group that I'm looking to partner with in a study.
Thank you. Staying on the issue of trust, we know this is a question for everyone, so just weigh in. We know that there is a fairly significant high level of distrust with certain health initiatives in the country right now. And how do you manage that as someone recruiting folks to participate, people who are participating, managing the clinical trial? How do you manage inherent distrust or skepticism of the clinical research in general when you have social media and the media feeding into this question about should we trust this or should we trust that?
Well, I can speak to it from a kind of a diversity perspective, because it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. And I strongly believe that in order to tackle the mistrust issues and to increase patient recruitment efforts or increase patient enrollment amongst diverse communities, we have to invite research naive physicians and sites in these inner city communities and these rural locations to participate in clinical research. We have not been great at that. And people trust the people they know. People trust people who are like them. And if we don't invite those doctors that are sometimes not included to participate, we're not going to overcross that trust barrier. The other thing is we need to start involving community centers, community leaders, faith-based leaders. These people need to be involved in kind of creating what that messaging is going to look like and what that recruitment strategy is going to look like, because again, these are people that others trust. So we have to start involving the right players. We have to start expanding our horizons to who is going to participate in clinical research from a site perspective in order to kind of get through some of those trust barriers. And I also am a strong believer outside of the diversity issue in providing a lot of information up front for consideration so that patients can actually review, if I participate in this clinical trial, how will I do X, Y, and Z? How will I do travel? Is this going to be a financial financial burden. So having a clear, like patient-centric program developed when you start the recruitment initiative will help with that, because then patients can see that this is what's expected of me, but this is the support I'm going to have. And that could make a huge difference in their decision on whether they're going to be interested in this clinical trial or not.
So I'll kind of maybe just a slightly different angle or build on that a little bit. So, I mean, I think I always try to battle misinformation with correct information, right? That's the first place to start, that I didn't think about, right? So I think, you know, when we produce materials, what are clinical trials? That is a core component of all of our materials. Just, you know, helping patients to understand what exactly clinical research is. It is different than their normal kind of standard of care and treatment. And I think that just to kind of build on what you were saying in terms of going where the patients are, involving the care teams that are treating these patients in the clinical research process, we really do need to expand our investigator pool. I mean, you know, we have a lot of investigators that are retiring, or, you know, we need to bring in a more diverse investigator pool and really work toward clinical research as a care option and kind of bridging the gap between what is standard of care and what is clinical research. And I think that's where really walking that journey of the patient is so incredibly important, and really identifying exactly where your trial falls in their treatment journey. And then how do you wrap a nice net around them to bring them to the trial and support them while they're there. And so it really just kind of comes back to fundamentally doing that every time, I think.
And I'll just make a plug for a recent toolkit I learned about. It's from the Office of Surgeon General, and it's a misinformation toolkit. And I thought it had some nice tips for this really difficult, so many levels that it's touching of individuals' ability to trust in what clinical research is providing.
Okay. Heather, Elizabeth, Eric, both of you have discussed trust before, so how best to address this issue in clinical trials? Heather, Elizabeth, you want to go first, or do you want Eric?
I'd like Eric to start off this time.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. Whenever you're meeting with I remember specifically, so I'll give an example. I remember specifically in one of the interviews that I was doing, and I called these interviews, call them whatever you want, consultations, where someone was trying to pitch me on joining that trial. I guess recruiting would be the word. And it was not, it was uncomfortable for me. And not because I thought that there was nefarious things going on in the background, but it was the delivery of the person who was talking to me. So I think it's important that whenever the trust factor, you have to trust your doctor, but sometimes doctors aren't the best communicators of you know the true message. So I think it's very important for these organizations that are running trials or having these difficult conversations with patients to make sure that the person that's delivering that message is the person that should be delivering that message. Because that was I immediately, within 1 minute of that conversation, knew that I was not going to participate in that trial. Do I have what does that mean for everybody else to help you learn from it? I don't know. I think presentation and delivery are so important. And I know that those are things that are taught to doctors and nurses, but I think it needs to be a greater focus if we want to get really good in this space.
And Eric's experience is different than others. He was very proactive. And I think you should call them interviews because that's what you did. It was your healthcare that you were focused on. So that's a very interesting perspective. Hello, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. I agree with Eric, and I kind of wanted him to go first because I wanted to gather my thoughts because I do feel like that is a difficult question to answer. Trust seems to be so important, but also quite possibly tangible as well as intangible. And just like, Eric said in one conversation, automatically the presentation did not sit well with him. And I think that for a lot of patients, we want to still be humanized and not othered as much as possible. And so if I'm participating in a study, I understand that you're researching and studying whatever is going on with me medically and you're getting information, but I don't want to feel like an animal in a zoo. I don't want to feel that I am just a number on a paper. I want you to know that even if I'm, patient 1000 in this trial or patient number 3, that I'm Heather Elizabeth Brown, and that I, survived this and then I'm dealing with this and that I am a person with hopes and dreams and aspirations and pains and, confusion points and everything that goes with, who we are as people. And so I think that that's a big part of how we can establish trust. I think understanding that there needs to be a level of compassion and a level of empathy and a level of understanding that goes with getting people to participate in these trials goes a long way to establishing trust. I want to know that the people I'm dealing with are, consummate medical professionals and they know their stuff inside and out, and that they, on the medical, scientific, technical, logistical side, that they have everything down, but also on the intangible side, I want to know that they actually care about this, that I'm a person that they're invested in because of who I am and not just because of what data they can get out of me. And so I think that that's a big point when it comes to establishing trust with patients, because patients, we still want to know that our experiences matter and that we matter as more than just, a number or an anonymous, dot on a paper.
Eric, can you talk a little bit about your nonprofit, the Gladiator Project, that you and your wife formed, and what you're hoping to do with this and who you're trying to help and how you're trying to help them?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for the question and for the platform to share. It's something that my wife and I are extremely proud of, and we're just getting started. So when I woke up in the neuro ICU in February, I knew I wanted to do two things. I wanted to shoot a round of golf in the 70s, which I haven't done yet, but I'm working on it. And I wanted to start a charity to help patients that were going through this and to fund research to find a cure for GBM. Right now, I think it's been incredible because if you Google, my neurosurgeon told me as I was going into surgery, he said, don't Google, you or your family don't Google GBM, because the prognosis is 12 to 18 month life expectancy. And I made everybody wait like 3 or 4 weeks before anybody Googled it. I know we all probably did, but the power of optimism and ideation are so important with healthcare and with everything in your life. And the founding of Gladiator Project has been remarkable because we got some incredible publicity very early on. We were number one. We had a local news article on local newspaper. We were on the Today Show. We were the number one trending story on Apple News. We were on the MSN homepage. It was amazing. But what that caused and what made it even more exciting for me is that people from all around the world who have gone through this or have had loved ones who have gone through this have reached out. And I've heard more positive stories than negative, because, you Google something, or if you do a review or if you watch the news, it's going to be all the bad stuff. People don't share the good stuff because they don't want to jinx it, right? They don't want to jinx it. I'm doing great now. I'm sharing it with the world. I think it's important from a patient advocacy standpoint or a patient support standpoint to share the good news too and get that out there. So like I said, we've heard from people all around the world. The goal of Gladiator Project is to help patients navigate GBM diagnosis. Right now, we're supposed to focus specifically on GBM to help them fight like gladiators through this. And we're really encouraging people to look at other options through whether it's clinical trials or other research initiatives that are ongoing. And we're directing them to a lot of these places that we're talking about. And the outreach has been incredible. So 50% of our focus is on the patient side and 50% is going to be on the research side. In a few short months, we've only had one fundraising event. We've raised well over $100,000, and we're having our first meetings this month with the American Brain Tumor Association, with MD Anderson, and a couple other organizations where we're going to start dispersing funds from Gladiator Project to start making real change. Now, I will admit, we're in the infancy stages. I still know nothing about any of this. I'm a patient, who has GBM, but we're learning and we're finding that we can make a real impact. One of the things that occurred as we were interviewing all these brilliant neuro-oncologists is that funding for research was neglected significantly for GBM, and that the standard of care, which has been the same for 15 years, is unacceptable. It doesn't really work. So my goal ultimately is to help patients, guide them in the right directions to take control of their care, to give patients hope, and to find a cure for GBM. And if anybody wants to learn more, you can go to our website, gladiatorproject.org. We've got blog posts, we've got resources for patients, we've got our upcoming events. We're doing a spring classic up in the Northeast, a golf tournament. We're super excited. We think we're going to double, triple, quadruple our fundraising for 2022. And we plan on making a real change and dispersing those funds in Q1 of 2022. So we're super excited about that.
Great. Well, thank you for what you're doing. It's very important. Question for Katie and Renee. We've talked about the importance of communication. And can you describe your process or strategy when communicating with patients when you're talking about matching them to a potential study, and how that's changed over the years, particularly with the advent of more person-to-person technology. But let's stay with the trend of communication and talk a little bit about how you use that in recruitment.
So in terms of communicating with patients, I think, again, you need to think about how do they receive messages, or how are they looking for information, and start there. So definitely kind of, when we think about doing outreach programs, putting our messages a bit more broadly beyond those site populations, we're looking specifically for channels that target population leverages in their own kind of, seeking of information, online or in different types of forums or with partners that we work with. From a technology perspective, I think one of the things that we have been implementing more recently is sort of, I term them amenities, but it's really kind of those support services that wrap around that experience. So if I put a message out there and someone clicks on the message and I bring you to a website and I ask you a couple questions and I deem, okay, you're a good candidate for a conversation with the study doctor, if I think about this as an offer and a sort of almost sales experience, right, as a consumer, how can I make that as easy for you as possible? So, I've helped you connect to a site. How do I make sure you can get to that site? How do I make sure you have an appointment? So offering up, kind of a chatbot experience, so you schedule an appointment right there on the spot. Integration with transportation services. So I know we work with the MD team on some of our projects. So really helping to support bringing to the patient to the office. How can I knock down all of those barriers in addition to kind of, beyond just helping you find the information? That really kind of sometimes is that first step in the process. And I really have to help, kind of make that concierge experience to bring you all of the way.
Wonderful. So when we think of recruiting, sometimes it's easy to go to the sort of first level of where you might reach people. And I think it's critical that we continue, and we're trying, and I know all groups are trying to dig deeper and look at where are individuals who might benefit from the research, may be interested in the research, but don't have access to finding out about it, or don't have access to believing that they're welcomed to even be included in the study. So as far as the messaging, we try to have everything at a 5th grade level. We talked about translating. We try to look at forums that are either social media or in person or community organizations, or using sites that are embedded within their communities. I think it's a continual learning process. I think sometimes organizations, we find our sites that work well, but we have to constantly be growing sites and clinics and clinicians and our organizational context, so we can keep being able to offer recruitment and research opportunities as many people as possible, and especially in a way that everyone feels truly welcomed. And so it goes back to that health literacy and work to create an inclusive environment.
How do you manage social media and the vagaries of social media? And a lot of good can come from it, but a lot of bad can come from it too. But how do you manage that when you're trying to communicate with potential participants?
Right. Well, we have a communications team that are experts in this, and then we have patient and community advisors help us understand if the messaging resonates, if it makes sense. Is it health literate? Does it tell them what they want to know? Is it clear? And then we partner with organizations to share as the trusted messenger. And that must mean that the organization must believe in the work too. So these organizations are making decisions regarding, is this an okay item to share with my community? So that's part of our method.
Okay. Well, it wouldn't be fair to not have a COVID-19 question, but this is for everyone. How has COVID-19 and the global pandemic affected the clinical trials that have been going on and then future clinical trials? Yes, please.
Well, we probably all saw firsthand how it affected the clinical trials that were ongoing, and we had to shift our gears. Decentralized clinical research was something that only a few tried here and there on certain trials, and certainly we all had to figure out ways that we could implement decentralized methods in our clinical trials. So it impacted that a lot, but I think it opened the door to increase accessibility, because now it's become more of the norm to have some of your visits happen in your home. And if you can't make all of these sessions, that's okay. We can bring a nurse there. So it's increased accessibility. But I think for what it's done for new studies, it's raised kind of, like we said before, this awareness of, do people know what clinical research is? I think COVID showed us that people don't, and people don't understand clinical trials, and that's a problem. And we've talked about all these solutions, and we're working really hard to tackle them, but it's such a larger problem. We have to tackle it eventually at the public health, public policy type of level. I think back, to all of the different campaigns that I was exposed to as a child in school. I mean, we all had the DARE program and MAD and Stop, Drop, and Roll. I mean, these things were ingrained in our heads. And I think that we need to get to a point where clinical research is like that, where we are educating, children in school about the benefits of clinical research. Start a slogan, good for me, good for the world. But there needs to be an overall awareness to what it is, so that there is more participation, so that we aren't trying to figure out, well, how do we invite them? Because then people know about it. And I think that COVID is starting to, having COVID and thinking about clinical research in the light of COVID, I think this is something more people are thinking about. And so maybe we have a chance of that becoming true public health policy, and awareness just being a part of our everyday practices. And hopefully that will help with a lot of the problems we discussed today.
So I would say on a positive side, kind of building on what you said, I think it got us excited about research, or got people who never heard about it before excited about research. I think the idea of being able to come together and bring solutions to market as quickly as we did to solve a global problem or address a global problem was a really big thing. I think that where it places more, I think, burden on us as industry leaders, I think we have to think about what we're bringing as a consumer offer to patients, whether that's a trial, whether that's the technology that we use. If you think about what COVID did, it made it very easy where you can order just about anything from your couch, right? And you can drive up and someone puts it in your trunk. and so if I join a clinical trial and I'm showing up for my appointment and you're collecting all of this data about me and I never see any of that, right, for example, but yet when I go see my doctor, I get my lab results in 24 hours. We have to think about the consumer experience I think we create if we really want to make that leap into that clinical research as care, which I think is what really kind of, again, bridges that gap between, that misunderstanding, I think.
Right.
And then hand a patient a paper form, 5 paper forms to fill out when they get there, and they're like, what is this? So that's a really good point, Katie. It has to match how they live now. Banking, right? We all do only online banking. So we think about everything we do digitally now, right? So, the rise of consumerism, I feel like, is sort of coming.
I have a couple things to share. Please go ahead.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
A couple of things that I noticed that I just had jotted down as we were talking today. Number one, a negative to COVID-19. My wife has not met in person any of my doctors. So that's a big negative. And it made it tough as we were going through the process. But one of the good things that I saw that came out of it, and I'm no public policy expert, but there's some advocacy that needs to happen now. But all the emergency pandemic waivers that were in place with every state medical board, well, those are now all expiring. I think all of them, but maybe 2. And now things that I was able to do remotely from Nashville to Houston, I can no longer do as part of my clinical trial. And I think that's a major issue, and it's going to hold us back from progress in this space. There needs to be, it was a great thing that came out of it, these pandemic waivers. But then now that they're expiring, we're limited on who we can reach and who we can touch. So I guess my point of bringing that up is there needs to be some advocacy from a public policy standpoint to allow these organizations to work across state lines remotely to give care to the people that need it the most. And it's impacted me negatively because now I have to fly to Houston every month just to see my doctor, even if there's no major, there's no MRIs, there's nothing. I can get blood drawn from here. Now I have to go to Houston for that. That's a major problem. It's an area that we need to focus on.
Heather Elizabeth.
I would just echo what Eric is saying, and I think from that experience, I can only imagine. One thing that I think as a COVID patient, obviously the impact that COVID has had on me in my life, but also just in general, what I've seen is there are a lot of trials and studies and interest in research now. I've obviously specifically around COVID because that's what's going on right now, but other things as well. I feel like it has raised awareness for people about the need for research and for trials and for studies of all kinds, and just to what we were talking about ease of accessibility and ease of access. I think that the one thing is because of pandemic restrictions, there were, people who had to have, I've had a lot of virtual appointments, right? There are some appointments where I have had to go in, but I have been able to meet with some of my, doctors or, providers virtually, but also been able to participate in some studies. Like I'm wearing a wearable right now for a wearable study. They sent me the information. We did everything online, sent it to me in the mail. I had it the next day, as opposed to maybe I would have to wait, or maybe I would have to go in and pick it up or something like that. So I think that there are some adjustments and changes that have been made that really are reflecting the world that we're living in now, that are reflecting the fact that you can order anything from your couch. You can get groceries, you can get furniture, you can get, you can get beauty products, you can get electronics, anything you want, you can get it from your couch. You don't have to necessarily leave your home when it comes to medical appointments as well, for a majority of people. But I think that also raises the point about diversity and access that we talked about earlier. So there are some people who are now able to participate in studies or research when they find that information that otherwise they may not have been able to, because of the adjustments and accommodations that have had to be made in order to allow people to participate from a virtual setting. So I do definitely think that, to Eric's point, there are a lot of points that still have to be made in order to make sure that some participants are still successful. But I am encouraged that there have been some adjustments made in order to give people a different ease of access. And especially when people are dealing with very serious illness, the ease with which we can participate in a study or in a trial is really important. So anything that can happen to kind of mitigate the risk or lessen the stress of participation, I think is always a positive.
Okay. Thank you. Renée, did you have a...
I wanted to drop the mic after all.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Multi-sector partnerships have come out of COVID-19. The biotech working with health departments, working with faith-based organizations, working with the local roller skating rink to have a vaccination event. I mean, I think it's created these non-traditional connections that reach communities and populations in a way that I feel research hasn't in the past. And I think the more we can lean on those non-traditional, which will hopefully will become more traditional in clinical research, academic institutions partnering with community-based organizations and health departments and researchers in biotech. I see that as a real positive that has come out of COVID.
I think there are a lot of positives that have come out, and we'll learn more about them in the months and years to come. But the number of people who volunteered for COVID vaccination trials, I think, was at a pretty record high number, which is interesting. We've had a lot of good discussion, and we're going to have one final question. Okay. Sure.
And while I have the mic, if anyone has a question, I can pass the mic. So, in fact, we can start over here, and then I can come back around to my question if we have time.
Hi, I'm Chris Learn, Astari Oncology. So thank you all today for presenting this. It's been really important. And to Ms. Jernigan's point, I think only between 3 and 8% of the eligible patient populations participate in clinical trials, which is really a small amount. And I think we've talked today mainly about ease of access and engagement, patient advisors, trust and message advocates, and increased accessibility. But from your perspective, is there one unifying opportunity for the research community to seize on to sort of further empower this at this time?
Katie had a good idea. So I'll start with, so one of the things that we have really changed in thinking about patient recruitment at IQVIA, because I think historically we have thought about, we find the sites and the sites have the patients. I think it's about taking one step back from that. First, where are the patients? Start with that first, right? And understand where exactly your population is treated, and then develop a strategy around that. Whether that's how you select your countries and your sites, the support that you offer to kind of augment around that, how you design your trial, or how the visits are then managed while the participant is in the trial. So really, I think kind of almost turning around the way that we have approached our thought process in that, because what we really think about is the concept of every trial really needs almost a hybrid recruitment approach. It's not always going to be a site-based recruitment approach. Even if you don't have a marketing campaign or an outreach campaign associated with your trial, every site, almost like what Renée was saying, they have their own community. There are nuggets of opportunity within their own community. Do you understand what those are? Are you giving them the tools to help really kind of pull that out, or just simply giving them the resources? Sometimes it's a people need, and they need the right staff to help them as well. So I think kind of looking beyond just find the sites first is really kind of, I think, a real important piece. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and I was going to say that there's a lot of grassroots organizations that are coming up now that have been utilized in some of the COVID vaccine trials, actually, to tackle this problem. And their focus is, they're these organizations that are embedding themselves within various communities to spread the word about clinical research, to spread the word about whatever the particular indication is, and they're doing it in very unique ways. So they're, if your goal is diversity, you want to increase the amount of Black participants, they're going and working with HBCUs, and they're going to their science programs and biology programs and talking about clinical research and how you can get involved. So they're focusing on raising the awareness at the root of where you're trying to get your voice heard. They're working with faith-based organizations and with churches and with other types of community leaders to really bring them into the conversation, and maybe they can hold a focus group about it. And it was really, Moderna actually published an article about how they tackled their vaccine trial by utilizing some of these organizations, and it helped a lot with their diversity. They had such great diversity, not just in race, but in other aspects too, with their trial, and they leaned on these groups to do that, and it worked. So I think, utilizing some of those non-traditional methods that are now available to us in clinical research will help tackle that problem of spreading the word, because I think the first thing we have to tackle, you named all of those issues, we have to tackle the awareness issue first before we can do anything else. Once people are made aware of the options that clinical research brings, then comes, okay, how do we make it accessible for them? How do we remove the travel burdens and all those other things? But if they aren't aware and they don't know, then we don't get the chance to kind of get to those other issues.
And I'm actually going to add one more thing. So the other thing that I think of, and I think specifically, Chris, in the oncology space, what I see is that we're also having a lot more interest from sponsors that are interested in having conversations about, I'm going to call it secondary matching. So essentially, if you bring a patient to a trial, particularly with an oncology protocol, very specific inclusion and exclusion criteria, if I fail because of a biopsy result, there's probably another trial that I would qualify for, but maybe it's by another sponsor. So how do you almost think about the trial opportunities as a journey as well? So if you're not eligible for this one, what's the next one in your treatment pathway that makes the most logical sense? And I think we're hearing a lot more interest from our sponsors about working more collaboratively with other sponsors, almost sort of like consortium type of mentality, right? We all need these patients, and kind of, working in our little silos is not proving to be effective all the time.
I'll just add, that makes me think of precision medicine, and if the focal point is the patient, and then I know we have a lot to work on as far as trust and understanding, but then what are the best research options, regardless of what the study is? What are the best options out there?
Thank you. Heather, Elizabeth, Eric, you want to add something to that?
I actually don't have a whole lot extra to add. I think that they covered it really, really well. I just think that continuing to be mindful and cognizant of all eventualities and how everything affects people, especially when it comes from the patient side, obviously, because that's the side that I'm coming from, is vitally important moving forward when it comes to trials and studies and enrollment and participation. I just think that it's going to take a continued and sustained effort in order to make it a viable and valuable option for everyone involved.
I think it was Katie that mentioned everybody in being in their silos, because there are a lot of, and I can just relate this to me specifically. Like I said, I don't have a lot of exposure to all clinical trials, just mine. But we've got a lot of people out there trying to do a lot of amazing things. And they're all in these little silos doing all these amazing things and not sharing information. And I don't think they're purposely doing that. Some of it is, you know, capitalism and at its finest. And some of it is just not having a channel to do so. And I know there's probably things out there, and there may be databases that, you know, I would love my data to be out there, to be shared for other researchers to look at. And I don't know what's going on in that space, but I know from my experience in talking to some renowned neuro-oncologists that that's not the case. They meet in large groups nationally, but do they have a shared space with actual data that they could use and cross-reference to get to the end result faster? I don't think it's there. So somebody mentioned a consortium. Somebody mentioned siloed. I think that's where the major opportunity is. Let's get rid of silos and have more concerted effort for organizations to be able to work together.
Very good points. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to thank our panelists, particularly Heather, Elizabeth, and Eric, for sharing your personal stories. I think you brought a lot today, and we learned a lot from you. And to the rest of the panelists, thank you very much.